Hello, my name's Gary and I'm one of the tech support people at Donor Management, and welcome to this introduction for Donman. And what we're going to look at today primarily will be the donor entry screen and some of the fields, and I'll explain some of the functionality as we go through. When you first start up Donor Management, this is the screen you will start on, and the area that we're going to go into first of all today will be under donor entry. So this is the screen where we store basically all of the contact details, and other associated information attached to the donor record will be from here accessible via certain buttons on the screen as far as donor history, notes, additional addresses, etc. So on the main screen itself, the donor number field up the top here, where the cursor is at the moment, is a mandatory field, and the system will normally dictate the next number in sequence. So if I were just to press enter, the system will automatically give me the next donor number. However, if I'm just looking up an existing record, there's two ways I can primarily do it. If I know the ID number of the donor that I'm looking for, because I've sent some correspondence or I've sent an appeal letter or something similar, and on that coupon I've got the donor ID number, then I can just type the number in of the donor, and I don't need to actually do any further lookup. That will be that person's record. If perchance I don't have that, there is a button down the bottom here called Multi-Find, and if I click on here, this is where I can search the data. So if I were to put something like SM in and then search, the system will sort, in this case, or search for all records where the surname starts with SM. In the system itself, or within Donman, there are three main files that the system will search by default. In this case, I've only got people matching the surname I'm looking for in donors, but if I've archived records, the system will automatically search the archives, or if there's additional address records. So if I've got second addresses like PO boxes, or I've got PA's details, or I've got anything like that, the system will search these records by default. And at the top of the screen here, there'll be more tabs to show to say what you searched for was available in one of the other fields. So from there, if I were just to double click on one of the records, will then take me into the main record for that person. So you can see up the top here, we've got the donor number. Across from there, there's the user number, which is basically an alphanumeric code, which doesn't need to be a unique code and can be used for any sort of alternate ID. In the case of medical places like hospitals, etc. like that, that may be for UR numbers or patient numbers, and it allows me to cross-reference databases. If perchance I'm dealing with a telemarketing company or something like that, where they've got their own unique IDs and I've got mine, then that's where we can utilize the external company's ID numbers to put that there. And most of the programs that we use then to import data from those external companies will look at that number first and say, well, that's the same person, and allocate the donations or update the record to suit without doing any further duplicate checking. From there, the first part of the screen is fairly self-explanatory as we go through. There's title, there's first name, surname, and the last box after surname is for post-nominals. So if somebody's an OBE or any distinction that we want to put there, we can put those into the field, and it's really just a matter of typing those in. So whatever it is you want, if there's more, we can just put a space and put more characters in there. From there, we have, in this case, I've got a corporate record or a business record. So I've got a position and I've got a company name. And the first of the drop-down lists where I've got a mandatory field, and if I click into there, you can see now at the right-hand side here, I've got the three drop-down buttons. So this will take me into a list that is controlled by what I've set up in the actual database itself. So this is basically where I start to set up the structure of my system as far as business records, clubs, associations, educational institutions, deceased estates, government records. So really whatever coding you want here you can have, but normally this would be just like most data structures. This will be the hierarchical code. So if I was going to have something like clubs and associations, I don't normally do it down to the level of saying what sort of club they are. I can use other things to distinguish that, and I'll explain that a bit more as we go through. So in this case here, I've got a business record, and the last column here is dictating where it's got a sort by, it's either C or S, which is the company field, or the surname and first name. So in this case, the system has automatically generated the sort key based on the organization name. This has two impacts in the system. One is when I do reports, and the other one is when I do receipting. It's telling the system, for the sake of receipting or reporting, that this is the organization's record, the person is my contact. Whereas if I had a record that was an individual, the sort key will then be based on the person's surname and the first four initials of their first name. The salutation can be generated automatically, and the defaults that you can have are dear title first name, as I've got here, or you can have a dear title surname. If perchance I've got somebody who doesn't have a first name, or I just have an initial, so if in this case I'll just go up and edit the record and go through, the system will then say, you've changed the name, do you want to update the salutation of the gender? So as I enter through, so it's now put Dear Mr. Smith, because obviously I wouldn't want to have Dear W. Okay? So based on what we've put into the data itself, the system will try and work out, based on what rules I've set for the salutations, what will be my default salutation. If perchance I just wanted to have Mr. W. Smith in the name, but down in the salutation I wanted to put Dear Warren, then you can certainly do that. There's absolutely nothing to stop us from doing that at all. From there, I've got the street addresses. There's Street 1, Street 2, Street 3, suburb, state, postcode, etc. There are two external tools that you can use to add to donor management, which you can look up addresses. One is the rapid addressing tool, and the other one is called Quick Address System. In this case here, I've got the rapid addressing tool, and if perchance I wanted to change the address or look up the address, I can clear. Okay, so you can see, just like when I do it in a navigator or any other program like that, I'm basically looking up the address in reverse order. Okay, so if I were to say, put in any suburb at all, start typing it, it will show me what's available. Okay, so if I start putting that in, said, okay, this is the suburb that I'm looking for. So you can do it based on the postcode or the suburb name. As I start typing in the street, you can see I haven't had to type in the whole name of the street. I can just type in the first letter, and it's showing me that these are the two options available in that suburb. So if I choose the first one in this case, and from there I can put my number in, and from there, so the system's now showing me on the screen that it's matched and found this record based on the Australia Post database, and I've got a barcode and I've got the DPID number. If I just enter or click on the transfer button at this point, that will transfer the updated address onto the record. So you can see in this case, as I enter through, it's already got the suburb, state, postcode, it's got the DPID number and the pre-sort number, which is basically the mail centre number used by Australia Post when we're doing bulk mailings. The first of the places on the screen the system will do a duplicate check is under the postcode. So as soon as I get to this record and I get to the postcode, there's a brief delay then when the system has done the duplicate check. If it found somebody with a similar surname in the same postcode or a similar company name in the same postcode, it would have alerted me on the screen to say possible duplicates have been found and do I want to view them. So normally I would say yes, because the last thing I want to do is start putting duplicate records into my database. Okay. From there, if I had an email address, telephone number, homework, etc. So in this case, okay, so I can put in a, okay. So the system also does a duplicate check based on the email addresses, because as we're discovering with more online fundraising activities, peer-to-peer fundraising, etc., email is something that also comes up where sometimes people might have put their name in as, Rob Smith or Robert Smith or different connotations. So you might not find the record based on what you think is in your database. So if I say yes to possible duplicates, it will then come up and show me the record that's a possible duplicate, in this case not based on the name, based on the email address that I've put in. Okay. So in this case I'll escape and say no, it's not the same person, that's fine. Okay. From there, telephone work, home, fax and mobile. The system itself has no format for putting in the phone numbers because everyone has different needs or whatever they want to do. But primarily, if I was putting in something and I was doing something in Victoria, so I put 03, put the first 4 digits, and put the last 4 digits. Okay. two reasons for that. One is readability, and the other one is the most common thing people tend to do with data is put it into Excel. So this will stop Excel from truncating my telephone number and deleting the 0 from the front. This is specifically common in mobile numbers, where people will just put a mobile number, especially online, where there won't be a gap in the number, and Excel will do what it's designed to do. It will take the number off the front of, the 0 off the front of your number. Okay. From there, if I go down, the next of my drop-down fields is the mail code, and this is where I can use the system in two sort of different ways, depending on the size of the organization or how complex your mailings are. If in the case of simple mailings where I said, look, people get all mail, or they just get the newsletter, or they get tax or Christmas, and there's no real crossover, then I can use the codes as they are on the screen. If perchance I said, no, I've got a much more complex structure for that, I've got people that are on e-news lists, I've got volunteer lists, I've got all sorts of things I want to do, then instead of using the mail code like this, I might have something like this one here that just says they're on list. And then next to that on the screen, I've got a list button, and this is where I can have all of the different mailing, or correspondence lists that I need to generate. And if I needed to add somebody to a list, I could do that manually. So in this case, if I'm going to put this person on the newsletter and say they're also going to get my 4 main appeal letters for the year, I can do that and then OK. There is a mechanism in the system where I can set that as the default value based on the type of donor that I put in. So for business records, I might have different lists that I automatically put them on as opposed to individuals. And if the record has been added to a list, you can see now that the button called list down here has been highlighted, which means there are some values there. On the right-hand side, you'll notice other buttons, and again, they're red if there's information there attached to this record. When I do the selections for mailings, if perchance, no, I don't want to check for dupes again, if perchance I've put people on and said there's no mail donor here, the system by default, when we look at selections a little bit later in the process, will automatically exclude people that are marked no mail in this field here. Or on the right-hand side, there's a field just under the last change date here of no mail until, which is where I update people who have indicated they're going away for an extended period of time. And by default, I don't want to mail them until that date passes, and I don't want to go down and change their mail list, because the chance that I'm going to remember to come back and do that one record out of my whole database later is very, very slim. The field under that in the system itself is just called a user code, so it can be renamed on the screen and used for your own purposes. From there, in this case, I've called it Why No Mail, which means I would then have a drop-down list of reasons why this record is not getting mailed. Because traditionally, in most databases, if I mark somebody not to get mail, unless somebody happens to be looking at that record and there's notes or something to indicate why they're not getting mailed anymore, I'm going to lose that. If I mark somebody no mail and say the reason they're not getting no mail is down here because they might request no mail, I might have RTS where I haven't been able to look up the record yet or update them. It's really just giving me something on the screen that I can look at to know why this record was marked no mail. The next two fields would be the flag 1 and flag 2 fields. Again, these are just fields that I can rename on the screen. And unlike the why no mail, it's not a drop-down list. It's something that's purely just a yes-no value. So it can be used for really any purpose you want, where you just say, look, I need a true or false value on the screen that I can use when I'm segmenting the data. As we go through, the sex field or the gender field is automatically updated by the system based on what I've put up in the title. If I put something like doctor or professor or anything that's outside of the normal Mr., Mrs., Miss, etc., the system won't put anything in there, and sometimes even based on the person's name, I might not know what gender they are. It's not a mandatory field, and you can leave it blank. If perchance I were to go through this record again, the system will look at the title and automatically generate that back again anyway. So it's just something the system will put in if you don't. The VIP is just a yes-no field. The alternate salutation is used by some organisations where I might want to have on the main screen here, I might have Dear Mr. Smith, and under the alternate salutation, I can have Dear Warren. So it gives me the option to be able to write to the person one way or the other. And it's also a good facility where I've got a number of people in the same household that I'm sending newsletters or something similar to. From there, gifts in kind is purely a yes-no value. But if I say yes, will put me into the field below that, where I'll have different codes to identify the sort of things that this person does give me as a gift in kind. The actual details of what the person has given me as a gift in kind gift can be recorded the same as a financial transaction, but the dollar amount itself isn't captured so that it doesn't intermingle with my financial reporting at the end of the year. From there, the acquisition date will be the date that you create the record. So whenever I've created a new record, it will by default be today's date. If I was updating data or something, I can change the date to suit, but normally we just leave the default. From there, we'll have the initials of the staff member who's changed this record and the date the record was last changed. So you can't, as you can see, I can't get into those fields. They're purely controlled by the system. They are good fields for, if I wanted to find out how many records, not just how many records have donated in a certain date range, but how many records have changed. I've got something on each person's record or each company record that will tell me that that has happened. The no mail until field is the one that I was referencing just before, where if this person has said, look, I'm going to be away till mid-September or something, then I can just put in the date there. And by default, when I do a selection for mailing, this record will be excluded until that date passes. So it's just like a temporary flag that I'm putting onto the person's record. Date of birth is a lovely field if you can get it, but it is something that's becoming much harder to obtain from the donors because they're saying, well, that's something that really you don't need to know. Some organizations can, ask it. Some people will give you it, and of course lots of people won't under privacy laws and things like that. From there, the donor source is the next of my drop-down list, and this is where I can have really as many codes as I need to identify the different sorts of things that we're doing that are attracting people to the database. Like what sort of activity is it? Was it an in memoriam donation? Was it something that came from online, etc. So that I don't need at this point here to have dates or years attached to the codes because I've got the acquisition date of the donor up here. So if I wanted to find out how many people were put onto the database from different source codes, I've got those 2 bits of information already. If you're an organization that has membership, then I can have member yes, no here, and then the field next to there, I can have different levels of membership. So if I've got family membership, couples, singles, or I might have tiers of membership where I've got bronze members, silver members, gold, platinum, whatever structure you've got, we can then mimic that within the system. The user code 2 field, just after the membership one, is another field that we can rename on the screen and you can use for your own purposes. So basically you can rename it and use it as a drop-down list for anything you like. So in this case here we can see it's been set up as types of religion, but there's no restriction to what you can use that for. The next field down has duplicate use in the system. One of them is to look at a record and say, I want to regionalize the database based on the postcode that the record belongs to. So in this case here, based on the region, if I enter, you can see now that's updated from what it was, New South Wales, up to Victoria, because within the structure of the database, I've set up a coded field or a file that has a list of postcodes and then which region I want that record attached to. So it can be down to anything you knew. If you're doing some reporting that's required by the Department of Health or anything similar to that, you can set up your own regions to suit, and that allows me to record. The region code itself can also be passed to when I process payments from people, so I can do regional breakdowns on the transactions. From there, bought goods will update automatically if I've done some sort of merchandising within the system. So if I'm selling entertainment books or T-shirts, hats, any sort of merchandising, when we look at setting up a campaign record in order to put funding into Donman, and then later on reporting on it, based on how I set that up, the system will automatically update this for me to say, yes, I bought goods, and the dollar total here will be the cumulative total of goods that the person's bought. From there, we start with the buttons that are additional information we can attach to the donor. From there, we have the address button. And this is where the most common use for this would be if a donor had moved address, I want to capture their old address. So in this case, if I choose previous, I can then click on the big button down the bottom here. That will copy all of the donor's current details across. I can save that, and then I can go back to the main screen and update their new address. Also useful in the case of if I've got a company where I had a PO box, and I've also got a physical street address. So in that case, I can use a different code here to identify what sort of address that is. So again, you can have no end of addresses attached to a particular record, and when you create data to write to this person, there is an option to choose which address type you're looking for. So in the case of, say, membership or something like that, where you might have a Mr. and Mrs. on the main screen, but you wanted to know only one of them was a member, then you can have an address type in here, a member, and when you do membership mailings, you could use that address so that it only pulls out the member that is actually and he pulls out the details of the donor, who is also a member. The involve button is more when we have internal involvement. So we wanted to know that this person was, say, on the board or a committee or something like that. So in there I've got different codes that I can create. I can then put the person's role on the board, the start date and the end date, and then any comments about them being in that position on that committee or the board, whatever it might be. So it's really for internal sort of information that does get lost in a lot of organizations, where I wanted to know that this person was involved in the organization as a staff member or something else, and I want to capture that information. Okay, so if I normally put my dates in, once I get to there, I can close that. And once I refresh the screen, okay, so you'll see now that these buttons have now highlighted to say I have put some information in there. The two buttons after that are purely spare buttons, and they've been put into the system to allow us to have extra functionality for organizations that might say, look, we need to have a special module or add-on written to the system because we've got some data that's fairly unique to what we're capturing and what we're doing, but we want it attached to the main record. Yeah, so for a lot of organizations, they will just say that they're spare and they're unused buttons. The next button available on the screen is the Notes button. There are 4 separate notepads available. And as you can see at the moment, I've just got some rubbish notes in there. I can rename the 4 different notepads, and each notepad at the moment will hold somewhere around 15,000 characters. If I were to put a new note in, especially electronically, what I want to do is move everything down. I can then click on Insert Date. It will put today's date in my user login, and from there I can put the details of my note. If perchance I wanted to attach a document or a photo or anything similar to that to the person's record, down the bottom of the note screen, I've got Insert Link, and if I click on there, it will allow me to browse to anywhere on my network, and I can create a shortcut link to pretty much any sort of file. If perchance I was putting in bequest notes, I can restrict which users have access to the notepad. So normally general is open to everybody, but the 3 other notepads I can restrict so that certain people, or staff that don't need to have access to those notepads don't see that those notepads are available. But from there, exactly the same process. I can put in some notes, whatever it might be, about visitations or anything else that I've had to do with that person. If I save, next time I go into notes, I can now see that there's also some notes under the bequest area. So just about everywhere within the system, if the button is highlighted, it's just telling me there's additional information to capture. The other sorts of things that I can have on the donor, as you can see here, we've got trust. So if I had a trust organization and I wanted to put details in about application dates, times, etc., what sort of things they're interested in, whether they're discretionary, whether they have a manager, different states, etc. From there, I can have details of all of the applications, and really it's just a way to manage all of the applications that we've put into the trust, and we want to keep all of that so I can look at them later. Okay. The relations is any sort of physical relationship between records. So in this case, there are no relationships set up at the moment. If I click on the Add or Edit Relations, I can then say that this record is whatever the relationship might be. So it might be employer, because in this case it's the company record. And from there I could go and find my other record. Okay? So whatever it might be, and say they are the employer of that person. As I enter through, it's now saying that dot is the employee of all sorts of imports. Okay? So it really doesn't matter what sort of relationship you're trying to put between the records. If perchance there's not one in the drop-down list at the moment that suits, you can certainly go and create a new relationship to suit, where we basically have the difference for all males and females. sometimes it's exactly the same, as we can see in the one above where we've got everyday hero. And I'm saying, well, for the hero, it doesn't matter whether it's male or female, they are still the supporter of that person or the sponsor. Okay. So again, when I get out of there at the moment, if I were to refresh my screen, I can now see that there's relations. The bequest area is not so much the full, bequest, or I've just received a bequest check in the mail, but I haven't actually dealt with the person, etc. This is where we're trying to nurture people as potential bequesters. Okay. So when I click on there, I've basically got the name and address details from the main screen. I've got the summary of the person's history, and from there I can go through and start putting in other details of the record. So whatever coding you have, some people use colors, some people use codes to, track from the time that we've sent somebody a brochure to we've had information, we're seeing them, they're interested, they're not interested, whatever it might be. Afterwards, the finalized bequest, I can have different codes in there. And then down the bottom of the screen, you can see, I can then go through and add a whole lot more information about this person and their potential bequest or their confirmed bequest. So I've got details here of confirmed dates, insurance to us, their birthday, whether they're married, single, married, divorced, widowed, spouse's name, their interests, their children's names. The third page is where I keep more different sort of notes that I just want to have on them that's not in the general notepads. I can have a code there for the legal organization that might be handling the bequest. And on the last page is where we can track visits that we've had or visits that we've planned to have with our bequest people. So the people or the staff member who might be doing the bequest visitations can then utilize this to draw out some reports to say I'm looking for all the people in my system that are marked for certain sorts of bequests where I might need to visit them based on a geographic region or just based on the codes or when they're next due for a visit. So I can use any of those things to sort of pull that detail out. The only button on the screen at the moment that is a optional module is the volunteer module. And again, if I click there, the top part of the screen comes across automatically from the donor. And from there, I'll then have the commencement date, date of birth, whether they've got someone available for emergency call, the status codes, etc. So all of the details I want to put against the volunteer I can have in here. I can have work areas placed. So if I said this person commenced today, I haven't got their date of birth at the moment. There's no one for an emergency call. From there I can have status. And again, all of these codes you create and use as you need to. There's no sort of set codes in the system. Sorry, my phone's ringing. There's no set code in the system. You have complete control over what you put in there. Okay. From there, we can have work areas placed. And again, you can create the different work areas that you have at your organization in order to attach to the person's record. There's availability codes, which might be AM, PM, all day, or you might have 2-hour blocks, whatever you're using to, so that this person's available on that day, I can use. If the person drives for me, I can have registration numbers. I can have make and models cars, their license numbers, their expiry dates. If I've got police checks, etc., which is fairly mandatory now, I'd have police check codes and police check dates. So this will be the date that the police check expires, that I need to have that renewed. And exactly the same principle down the bottom of the screen, I've got a working with children check. And again, I have a date in here, which will be the date it expires. And they're the two fields I use to do reports on my volunteers for people that are due to have a check renewed, basically, so I can update their record. Because I don't want people who are volunteering for us that may have had a license that's lapsed or any of those things. The next button across on the screen is functions, and this is where we try and keep tabs on people that we invite to an event, whether they've accepted, whether they've attended. The two places I can access this information is if I click on the function button itself, I'll have individual functions. If the person has more than one function record, down the bottom of the screen here, the button text will show red to tell me that there's more records to look at. Okay? So you can see on here I've got the Christmas 12 campaign, or the function. They got invited in November 2012. In this case, they accepted the same day. So it may have been an email invitation that went out. From there, how many people are attending, how many tickets they've got. I can put in the cost of the ticket, etc. In Donman, the system, as far as functions goes, isn't a fully blown function system because it's basically a donor management system. So it doesn't have the facility to set up tables and a number of chairs and things like that. There's certainly software packages out there that are geared purely towards that thing. This is more in the case of the donors that you have on your system and maintaining a history of things that you've invited them to, what they've accepted. So later on we can start to see trends of what sort of things that person is interested in. The button across from there, the pledges, is where we can have a pledge record for the donor, and pledges can be used for quite a few different things. In the case of membership, it would be a once-a-year pledge, where normally, as in this case here, I've got down the bottom here that this person needs a reminder letter. If I've got donors that have said, you can take money out of my, give me your authorization to take money out of their bank account or their credit card on a monthly basis, so I've got regular gifts, then I can still set up a campaign here. Okay, so I might have one called auto deduct. So in this case here, this donor is already a member, so I don't want to change this pledge record. If I clear the screen, I can now go down and say, set up a new one. So this person's now signing up for an auto deduction. They're signing up today, and they're going to give me $25 12 times a year. The data next gift hasn't auto-populated because for most organizations, there'll be a set date that we do the auto deductions. So if we were running it on the 15th of the month, I'd now set this so that it was on the 15th of the month. If the donor has said to me or indicated to us that they're only going to do this for a certain period of time, then I can put the number of installments pledged here, but normally that's not the case for a monthly gift. Okay? But you can see as I go through, the system has calculated the total. As each payment came in, the balance due would decrement until it got to the point where the pledge would cancel itself out. As I said, in the case of regular gifts, where I've got people doing monthly gifts, that's not necessary. So I can just leave that blank. The amount of next gift goes in. And from there, if the person was giving me their credit card or bank account details, I could say, yes, it's an auto deduction, it's a credit card payment, and from there I can put the details in of the credit card. Normally, with credit cards nowadays, people that are doing this, certainly if we're doing quite a few of these, would set up with using a gateway, and the two gateways that Donman will support, when we look at processing donations in a later session, the two are Secure Pay or eWay. So what you would need to do is have an internet merchant account with your bank, which you can then use with the gateway account. Yeah, so it just means that your system then pretty much becomes PCI compliant because you don't have credit card details stored within your data anymore. If perchance I didn't have something like that, and I said, I've got that, if I put in a card number, in this case I'll just use the test number, and enter through, the system now stores that, but it actually encrypts the number. So if for some reason someone did get my data and wanted to report on that, the credit card numbers themselves can't be extracted in plain text or anything like that. But certainly gateway is the way that we would suggest people use nowadays. If the person needs a receipt every month, which is normally not the case, I want to receipt them once at the end of the year. Okay? And if there's a particular ledger code that people have said, they want their money to go to a particular area of support, and I've got different ledger codes for it, I can choose that. But if it's just a plain one, I can just choose the donation one or leave that in the campaign, which is something, again, we'll look at later. If they're an auto deduction person, I wouldn't need to have reminders. But in the case of a membership, as we saw before, I would say, yes, they do need a reminder letter because it's a once-a-year pledge. Okay. So I can set up more than one pledge for the record. And as I go through now, you can now see, as I was saying before, the button here is red to indicate that there's more than one pledge record for that person. Okay. So if I escape out of there, the last button available on the screen is the picture button. And it's not used by a whole lot of people at the moment, or organizations, but it is somewhere where I can add a new picture, and I basically go and browse for that picture, and that will basically copy it into my structure, so my Donman structure on the network. And I can also put a caption on the picture. So something that I can use. As I said, the functionality of that is good for just straight pictures, but lots of people have their own picture editor or viewer as part of Windows. And if I use the link functionality or the shortcut functionality in Notes, then Windows will take over and open that up. If I do it through the picture area itself, the system will copy that into the structure of Donman. So sometimes it might make my data structure fairly big because I've got all these pictures there. The bottom of the screen, and this is pretty much the end of this main screen, and this is really the hub of all the information. So at the bottom here is where I can have things like extra codes, which are like status codes or attributes if people have used a product like OpenArms or something like that, where I've got attributes that I can attach to a record. So, here you can see if the person was a board member, I could say, yes, they're a current board member. They also might be, someone who fundraises for me. They might be an everyday hero, etc. So for each record, I've got 8 of these extra codes available, and I can also use that when I'm doing the segmentation. So any of the fields on the screen that you see, you can use one of the codes or multiple of the codes to identify different groups of people when we do segmentation for mailing or reporting or any of those things. So if I were to enter through, the bottom, there are 2 screens of information primarily on each donor. The first screen is the one we've looked at, and it is really the hub of just about all the information. If I enter down the bottom here, see most of the rest of this screen here, if I had appointments that I want to put in, then I can have a refer to code or a staff code here. I can have an appointment date and details, and that will go into a diary mechanism, which Donman will maintain. From there, I've got fields for things like a occupation code or male job and date of birth, and female job and date of birth. And that would only be used in the case of a couple. If I've got a single person, I can put the date of birth on the first screen. If the person has paid me donations or something previously, and I've recorded by check, the bank and branch details will be stored by the system just to make it easy to do the entry next time. From there, things like whether the person's a subscriber, the date they last paid subscription, if they've given an in-memory donation to somebody, the date they gave in memory and who it was will be stored by the system. The receipt name can be stored different because sometimes it might be slightly different from the donor's name, or it might be a Mr. and Mrs. record where we're receipting to just one of the couple rather than both of them. In the case of an individual or company where I've got the web page address, I can put the address in here, and that will then give me a link over to the side, which I can go straight from the donor's record and into the browser. The details down the bottom of the screen are updated automatically as a summary of the donor's history. So it will show me their highest donation, their first, their last 3, their donation total from their very first gift till current, and I'll also have figures for total this year and last year and count. So I can quickly get an idea of picture of donors as far as their giving history, etc. And I can use any of these fields just like I can on the previous screen for doing mail outs and things like that. If I just go back to the first screen very quickly, and there's a couple of areas that we'll cover. If the record has got an email address like here, I can click on the email button down the bottom. The system will also enter a topic for your email, and I also get an option to add that to the person's contact records, which will be down under this button at the bottom here. So if I say test and say yes, I want to add it to their contact records. In this case here, because I haven't got Outlook running at the moment, that's going to start up, whereas normally that'll be much quicker. So it will automatically generate a new email address, new email message. So it's automatically put from myself the email address I'm sending it to, the subject, and because it's going through Outlook, it's already got my signature there. So I'd be pretty much be able to record that I'd sent that. In the person's history button, where I've clicked on the $sign at the bottom, will show me the history of all the transactions, and one of those tabs will be contacts, where then later on I could look and see all of the different contacts that I've had with people. When we look at doing selections for mail-outs, that is something that we update in bulk for a whole lot of people. We don't do one at a time. A similar function exists if I'm doing a one-off letter to somebody. I can click on the letter button. Again, I can add it to the person's contact records. For this one, I'm not going to worry. I'm just going to enter through. And the details, as you see them there, will go into the clipboard. So I can then go into Word and paste that in one hit without me doing a whole lot of, alt-tabbing and copying and pasting. So I can get all of that in. And if I just go into the notes here and paste, okay. So you can see in this case here, because I have got a DPID and as such I've got a barcode, it's telling me here this is the actual barcode that you'll see, and it's telling me what I need to do is change the font of that and change the size so it actually becomes the barcode if I'm doing it. But normally in the case of a one-off mail, I wouldn't need to worry about those details because the barcode's not going to help me at all. So I can just get rid of those and I'll just basically from there have the details of the name and address of the person. Yeah. So that makes it just a little bit quicker to do that one-off mailing. There are 3 places on the screen I can use, which in my case here for my dummy data won't help at all. But if I'm in the surname and I click on the scroll button on my mouse or I do Control F3, we'll do a white pages search of the donor. If I do it on company, we'll do the same sort of thing. We'll do a white pages search, as you can see down the bottom here, of the donor. Or if I'm on the street address, I can do the same sort of thing and it will just take me to Google Maps. Okay, and just do a search of that record or the address. So if perchance I had an address that I wasn't using the addressing tools or things like that, so I wasn't using the RAT or the QAS system, and I just wanted to validate because it looked like the street name was spelt wrong or something strange about it or the number was really high, and I just wanted to validate, I can certainly use that to do the Google Map lookup. Also good when I'm doing overseas addresses. So if perchance I had an overseas record, on the screen here I can choose overseas and it basically turns off the postcode validation on my data here. So down the bottom here the postcode validation won't play any part anymore and I have got an option then to put in the country code. Okay, so whether it's an Australian record or it's an overseas record, you've got the ability to put them in and that will give you all of the details. So when I save a record, as I said, I do get to this summary screen here. If I then save the record again, I'm back on a blank screen, which means I've now saved that record. I can create a new one or look up another person. Okay. So that's fairly much, there's one other area. On the screen itself here, where I've got these drop-down lists, I haven't got the ability to create, edit, or delete them on this screen here. And that's purely for safety, where I'd normally have a administrator of the database or a couple of people that are responsible for the structure of the system because it's paramount to how we extract the data later. The only place I can do that is under the housekeeping menu here, and I've got donor descriptive codes, and this is where I've got all the different sorts of codes. So normally this would be a menu that would be restricted to who can access it. At the moment, because I'm set up as an administrator, I can get into any of these areas, but it is something that normally we would restrict because unless you're a fairly small organization, we want to control what sort of coding we have in our system. Yeah? So that fairly much concludes the first area, which is the main donor screen. And the next part we're going to look at is setting up a campaign in order to do our fundraising and collecting mail, etc.